for letting me come here and talk. And really a lot of thanks to Anne, because she really was the one that helped me actually put this together. Because I had a lot of bits and pieces of my dad's stuff, and Anne really helped kind of condense it down and actually helped me fill in a lot of gaps, which I didn't realize about my dad. Which I will show you at the end. Which one of these pictures of these people is my father. So my father is. So depending on your ethnicity is what you call my dad's city where he's from. So right now it's Lithuanian, so it's called Vilnius. However, if you're Polish, it's Vilna, so his passport says Vilna, Poland. If you're in Yiddish, though, it's Vilna, and in Russian you also call Vilna. So again, a lot of different names. And before the war, it was called the Jerusalem of Lithuania because it had a very large rabbinical training. That's where the Vilna Goan was from there. And if you go to New York, the Evo Institute, which was founded in there, but now has moved into New York City, is coming from there. And before the war in 1931, the city was about a quarter Jewish. Vast majority of the people that were not Jewish were actually Polish. It was really a Polish city rather than a Lithuanian city. Just kind of in the maps, just from a geographic thing. So it was all after the treaties of Versailles. Lithuania, the Baltic countries became independent, and they redrew the map, which Poland was unhappy about the map drawing because this large area over here, where you see Vilna in red, was largely Polish. So when actually Poland and Russia had a war in 1919, and Poland won, and they occupied part of Russia, and they actually occupied that southeastern section of Vilna. And they actually annexed it into their country. So it was violated the Treaty of Versailles, became part of Lithuania, and Lithuania was not very happy about that. And so when my dad was growing up, right, he was living in that city, Vilna. His grandparents lived in the town that my grandfather's from, was right on the other side of the border, but it was a closed border, so they couldn't get there. So anyway, for the family to visit each other, they had to go through another country. You had to go through to Latvia, to go to Lithuania and stuff. I mean, it's a couple of kilogram meters apart, but there was because of the closed borders, they could not. So my dad could not see his grandparents on his father's side very often because of that. And Lithuanian, and it goes more into everything as we go along, because Lithuanian and Poles traditionally do not like each other, and this is just one of the many reasons in long succession of reasons why they do not like each other. This is a picture of the family about the turn of the century, and in red is my grandfather Elias, and they were from the small shtetl. It's called Shiventine, and I can see everyone in the front there. On the left is my grandparents, and in the middle is the great grandparents. They're in the center, and my grandfather looks a little different. He's kind of clean shaved and stuff. Is that because my grandfather wanted to go to university? And he wanted to go study, and eventually he became a doctor, but he could not get that education in that small town. So he actually went to a special school that was funded by the Tsars, and it was the purpose of the school was to educate Jews from the shtetls and educate them into secular education, and then to go out and become teachers. So he was actually attending a teacher's boarding school where he would learn how to become a teacher, to go there and help other Jews to assimilate into Russian society. But he used that as a means in order for him to get his secular education so that he can be accepted into university. He did go to university, and he went to Leipzig, so he went to university in Germany. This is a portrait of my grandmother Anna during World War I, when my grandfather was ended up being in the medical corps in the Tsar's army. During World War I, she wanted to be with him, so she quickly got a quick nursing degree, and they were able to go there together. The importance of the German is that if you're from this part of Lithuania, the smartest kids would go to Germany for their education. And then if you didn't get that, then you go to France or England, and if you didn't get that, then you would stay in Poland or Lithuania. So in fact, the first language my dad learned how to read and write was German. And he had a German tutor so that he can learn how to read and write. So my grandfather's hoping that my father and my uncle can follow in his tradition and go to Germany for graduate school. Yiddish was forbidden actually in my dad's house growing up because he was afraid that the Yiddish would corrupt his German, and he didn't. So my dad did not learn Yiddish as a child. Russian was the mother tongue for my dad. This is a little picture of my grandfather. He was on the staff of the Jewish Hospital for Women and Children in Vilna, and he was an OBGYN doctor, and and surgeon. These are some of his colleagues. This is little pictures of my dad. So in my dad's family is his mother, and he had an older brother, Alexander. And this is them as their typical kind of pictures of the time. This is a little family picture. On the right is the house, the apartment complex that they lived in Vilna. And on the left is a kind of a picture of a dinner. And you can see my dad is outlined in red, and that's his mother to his left. My uncle is right there on the side. Right in the center, of course, of the table is his grandfather. And that's one of his siblings. She was visiting from America. And the grandmother is on to the right. The house was secular growing up. And when my great-grandfather passed away, and so my great-grandmother is widowed, she would spend time with the different kids, and she happened to be spending time in my dad's house when my uncle was time for his bar mitzvah. And my grandfather did not believe in religion, did not believe in any of that stuff, but he had to bar mitzvah my uncle in order to make his mother happy. And after that, she then immigrated to Palestine to spend time with another sibling. She actually passed away during the war in Palestine. And then when she left, then my dad never had any religious education because she was out of the house. So my dad was never bar mitzvahed or had any religious kind of upbringing. They're very, very secular household. This is some pictures of my dad as a youth in Vilna. And this is how my grandfather, uncle, and dad looked at right when the war broke out in 1939. This is actually in Warsaw. They were making a little visit to Warsaw. And this is kind of the typical school uniforms there. My dad, on the left, you had to wear, those are the pants all the high school kids had to wear. You couldn't wear full-length pants as a kid until you graduated school. My uncle was in medical school, actually, in Lithuania. So because of what happened in Germany, there was no option to go to Germany for medical school in 1939, and they didn't have the means to kind of go outside. So he was actually going to medical school in Lithuania, which is part of the Polish system. A little background though about their education. So my uncle is in medical school there, and they just like they had the Jim Crow laws down here. They had it unwritten in Poland. We were getting more and more anti-Semitism as time go on. They're very, very nationalistic, and unfortunately, the Jews always suffer whenever countries become nationalistic. So when my uncle was in medical school, there was an rule that all Jews had to sit on the left side of the classroom. And the way the Jews protested that is that they would stand up and take their notes standing up in the back of the classroom because they weren't going to sit on the left side of the classroom. My grandfather, because he was not religious, sent the kids to public school. But by the time my dad was coming through the public school, all the Jews were taking their kids out of the public schools and putting them in private schools because of the anti-Semitism going on within the public school systems. And for my dad, he was ended up being the last Jew in his school, and he was just getting beaten up too much that my grandfather had to then take him out of reluctantly take him out of the public school and put him in a private Jewish school, sort of a secular one. But there was still religion in there, and the school that he went to was in Polish. There were other religious schools in Yiddish and Russian and Hebrew. It was all depending on where you wanted to go to. But he, I said, stayed in that. And my dad remembered going to the school, and religion was actually a state class in Poland, so you had to have it. And so at the end, he said he got all the Jews that were in all the public schools in Vilna, and he put them all together in one classroom, kind of like this size, and it was all like an old rabbi who was teaching them, and all the old rabbi kept telling to them, instead of lecturing about any religion, was like, you have to stay in the class. You have to show all the Poles that you are stronger than them. And the way you show them you're stronger by staying in the classroom and not letting them bully you out and kick you out and everything like that. You have to show them how defiant you are and what a strong character you are, and that's what this professor was lecturing them about. But this is sort of like kind of the atmosphere here, and this is in 1939 when they occupied it. The good ended up being the Russian coming in. So the Russians came in, and the family lost their car, lost a bicycle. My grandfather lost the private hospital. The Jewish thing closed because everything became public there. But one thing with the Soviet system is that they don't tolerate any anti-Semitism, so they closed all the private schools. All the private schools got closed, and all the Jews had to return to the public schools. But then when returned, the anti-Semitism was not allowed. So my dad went back to the same public school that he had to leave, and they got bullied and beat up. And he said it was a totally different atmosphere because the teachers who before were promoting this anti-Semitism and stuff were afraid of the Bolsheviks and the Soviets about getting deported. When you have the fear of being deported to Siberia, it kind of changed a little bit how you behave and what you tolerate in the classroom. And my dad said that for that period of time was actually a very good time because he actually got to be a teenager. So my dad was interested in art. His goal was to go to art school, and the Russians love art, and my dad would go after school to a Russian art academy and to prepare himself for his art studies, hopefully afterwards. My dad was on the cross-country ski team at school, and he said he got to be a kid because he actually got to go to school in an environment without all that other stuff that was going on before the Russians came in. So for him personally, he always says that kind of quietly. It was actually kind of good, kind of good years for me, although it was not good for other people when the Soviets came in. There's the occupation and stuff like that. They got annexed. Lithuania voted to join the Soviet Union. 99% of the population voted to say yes, they want to be part of the Soviet Union, so it became part of the Soviet Republic. And that all changed in June 22nd when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. Before the war, there was about 50,000 Jews. It got swelled up to 80,000 because a lot of refugees had come into Vilna by that time.
We didn't know what would happen to us. We had horrible stories from the refugees who came before. But of course we thought this will never happen to us. This happened to them. And here all of a sudden we're confronted with the reality. The German troops marched in.
Die Sowjets mussten Hals über Kopf die Stadt räumen.
Well, I don't think the Poles liked it, but Lithuanians were very happy to see them replacing the hated Bolsheviks. I think the population received them with flowers. My father worked in a hospital, and I remember we had an apartment on Teatralna Street, which is an old city. It's a very elegant place. And I remember father coming up and telling my mother that he was able to get a truck who would take him and me and my brother, and we can run away to Russia. At which point, my mother said, in that case, I'll throw myself through the window. My father disappeared, and when he appeared, later on he said, don't worry, I called the whole thing off. And this way we remained.
So, fortunately, my grandmother did not want to leave because one of the people not mentioned was her mother. So there are other family members, and my grandmother did not want to, be the only one leaving. It was all or none. So once the Germans take over, the first thing they have to do is a lot of chaos and get everyone off their guard so they don't know what's going on. And so then, so a lot of things kind of happen. Kind of the reign of terror starts coming. So they started doing a lot of snatching, where they just kind of take people randomly off the street. They introduced the Nuremberg laws that got introduced, and it became very fearful for people. They took a lot of the leaders out because that's the first thing they do is a lot of leaders, random period, trying to create this kind of chaos and this kind of terror so people don't know what's going on. They also started the first execution at Ponari. So before they had the gas chambers, they had the killing fields. And the killing fields in Lithuania there was called Ponari, which is right outside the city. And what they were actually oil places to store oil. So these were areas, large containers that you can store fuel oil. And so they make for nice little pits, which make nice places for people to be executed. In total, by the end of the war, about 100,000 people were executed. About 70% of those were Jews. The other 30% were various communists, gypsies, homosexuals, other mentally handicapped, other kind of undesirables. And on the left, the Siski prison, is where they did a lot of the interrogations and stuff. Where my grandfather spent a little bit of time there. I'll get to that a little later there. Two ghettos were established. one, the larger one, and the smaller one. The smaller one was mainly for processing, where for a lot of the older and the sick were in the smaller one. Kind of herd them in there and kind of empty it out, and then go down into one ghetto. My dad remembered going there, and I remember carrying everything. And a lot of the pictures that you see are actually stuff that they gave to their housekeeper. They had a Polish housekeeper that they gave a lot of their valuables to, and including all the photo albums that she returned after the war. And that's how we have a lot of the pictures from my family there. And she actually did sell some stuff to help them along the way. The leadership of the ghetto was Jacob Gens, and he established that. And again, that idea of work for life. If you can prove yourself productive, then you would be spared to go to Ponary at that time. My grandfather was actually the head of was with the first Judenrat, and that's why he ended up being at that Lusiski prison, because they arrested everyone on the Judenrat, and they had to ransom them. And luckily, again, they had some gold and stuff to bail my grandfather out. But my grandfather got a job at the hospital, and so that afforded them a little better combinations within the ghetto there. But one thing about my grandfather is, and the difference between my grandfather and my dad is that my grandfather was part of the leadership. And the leadership, my grandfather had a little captain's mentality. The captain is, the captain goes down with the ship. And so while my grandfather was doing a lot of things to help people, like in the hospital, if when we were pregnant, he kind of hid them in the hospital, and so women could give birth to their child, which normally, if you were pregnant, that was a death sentence for people. Or he did abortions for other women to want to terminate their pregnancy. So he did a lot of things to help people. He never had a plan to help himself or his family. That was because that's not what leaders do. We had the boundaries, and then you had the work papers, which are the yellow papers, the shine papers that you had, and usually you could put 4 people on it, husband and wife and kids. So you had more than 2 kids, you were in trouble with there and the people there. And my dad got a job working with signs because he was an artist, so he used his artist skills there. And then my dad started changing some of these documents. So he started forging some of these papers for other people, adding other names to them, doing other different things for people. If someone had to go outside, come back with 2 loaves of bread, he changed it. You can come out, go outside for 2 days and bring 4 loaves of bread. So my dad started using his art skills to kind of changing people's papers in order to kind of help them out there. And I'll explain a little bit later the last line there from one of his quotes were there, that this is a wonderful period of time, because you kind of question, like, how can someone say it was a wonderful time period? But I'll explain a little bit of that as we go along chronologically. Those people who know who Abba Kovner is a very famous figure, because he was the one for the inspiration for the underground resistance in Vilna. And he was a poet, and he did a very famous speech on December 31st, 1941, which included the slogan that we will not go down, will not be like sheep to the slaughter. And my dad's going to talk a little, the next clip is my dad talking a little bit about that speech and kind of how it kind of affected him.
I want very badly to join.
What was the name of
The organization was called FPO, which is Vereinigte Partisaner Organisatie. I was a young poet and painter who read the proclamation on the first meeting of the group in the American convent by the end of December of 41, which he said, we have to rise, we have to fight, we're not going like sheep to the slaughter, we're weak and defenseless, but we have to rise and fight to the last breath. And it was Abba Kovner. It is very interesting because this manifest is dated as January 1st, 1942. This is exactly when I turned 18. And Abba Kovner, who is one of the leaders of the entire thing, was 23. And this was about the ages of people of this group. The idea was to put a resistance and to fight.
So the whole idea of history mandated that there has to be some kind of response from the Jewish people. So they organized their resistance, and with several different aims into it. A lot of that was sabotage the Germans, slow down the whole supply chain, but also, as we all know about what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto, when the Germans came in to liquidate the Warsaw Ghetto, they were met with resistance from the Warsaw Ghetto fighters, and the Warsaw Ghetto fighters held off for 20 days from the Germans, and that was part of the plan there. And if you talk to the ones from Vilna, they always say that plan came from Vilna. It wasn't from Warsaw. It was Vilna. We taught them what to do because they had a lot of agents that went back between Vilna and Poland. They kind of shared resources and ideas of how to accomplish that plan. But that's what the plan that they were going to build for. My dad didn't know all about that, but he knew there was a resistance. He knew there was something going on, and he wanted to become a member of that. But in terms of stuff, there was a little bit of stability that was going on, and that's because the Germans had gotten rid of a lot of the old people, and they're kind of keeping that productive people. And one thing that's kind of key to kind of mental is just how to keep your sanity during this time and your dignity. And the way they did that is by continuing on with culture, with education, with schools. And that's one of the things my dad talked about, that he did stage design. So they put on theater shows in the ghetto. And my dad would design all the stages and everything like that behind it. And at that time, his goal was, after the war was going to be over, he wanted to become, work like I guess in Broadway and become the set designer, stage designer, do all that background stuff, kind of combining his art and love for the theater, and that was his goal. Another one of his jobs, though, was he would paint the faces on the watches. You always hear about them taking all the watches from the people as they boarded the trains. Well, someone had to, a lot of them were damaged, so someone had to repaint the faces on that. And my dad, with his skills, he would repaint all the numbers on those watch faces, and that was part of his jobs. And that's why he's saying it was a wonderful time period. It goes back to the Viktor Franklin, A Mankind's Search for Meaning. How do you make sense, and how do you look positively towards what the world is going around you and create that? And then part of this was part of that mentality of some things to look forward to keep your dignity, to keep you going. My dad always talked about this art competition that he got second place in. The one who got first place, some of you heard Samuel Bach. He was he's a well-known Jewish artist, and he was younger than my dad, but he got first place. My dad got second place to that. So in terms of the resistance, so my dad knows that there's resistance going on, but there's not a volunteer booth to go in there. They had to approach you. And in order to get that there, you either had to have the political connections and you're part of that part of the Bundes groups that were there, where leaders in the Bundes groups got recruited. You either had to have weapons or you had to have some kind of expertise. And so what got my dad's expertise is actually that foraging, what I started talking to you about. Well, one day this gentleman comes to my dad and says to him, I got passport paper. Can you make a passport for some of my family members, and so I can get them out of the ghetto? And my dad said sure, and he had to figure out how to do that, how to figure out how to make the passport, how to make the stamp, and how to make it look all authentic looking and everything. And he was able to do that for this gentleman, and he made the passport for that person. Well, a little while after that, Jacob Gens, who was the leader of the Judenkraut, that thing, came to my dad with the same request, saying that I have a family member I want to get out of the ghetto. Can you change the passport? So my dad took the person's passport, washed out his name, made a new name for him, a new name and identity, a non-Jewish name, and that for Jacob Gens, so he can get his family member out. Well, a couple of weeks after that, the Jewish resistance came to my dad with saying, "Would you like to join?" The resistance. My dad remembered going there, and they had a secret room in the library in the ghetto there, and they talked about it, and he explained to them the whole thing. Is there's a cell, and there's a cell of like 5 people, and you only got to know 4 other people, and there's a couple of hundred people there, and then what they were preparing for, and they were preparing again for what my dad was explaining to my dad is that ultimate thing is that when the Germans come to liquidate the city, we're going to fight to the death. And my dad said, yes, I'm interested, and I want to join and be part of that group. So my dad got to be part of this group. And it's a little excerpt talking about this.
There were 2 things which, actually 2 possibilities. The possibility of survival was next to zero. Now we already knew about concentration camps and death camps. Not exactly. We didn't know about gas chambers. Not that I recall, but we knew that the idea is final solution. The Germans are going to kill all the Jews. So the possibility is either to stay with young fellow fighters, revolutionaries, sing Soviet songs and fight to the last moment and kill Germans, or perish under horrible circumstances in concentration camp. So there was no question which was better. But I will say the truth. That deeply inside, I felt I'm going to survive. I don't know, something kept me that all the time. I had a very strong, fanatical feeling that I'm going to survive.
My dad always talks about that, and again, it goes back to that Viktor Frankl, survival versus non-survivors. That feeling that you're going to come out of this. And my dad talked about many different kind of close encounters he had during the war. And then when I Zerk, there's always this one that always comes to mind, and he mentioned to me several times that he was there one day in his working at his art project, where he's working in the art studio, and he had saw outside the street that that Germans had lined up. And so basically everyone knew what was going to happen is that the Germans had lined up in the street, and they needed their numbers were down. They needed some extra the numbers, and they were just going to close off the street and pick up everyone off that street, and then take them on the trains. And he goes out and he sees that, and he basically sees that his street's a dead end street, it's a cul-de-sac, and there's all the Germans lining up there. They're waiting for their signal, and as they're waiting for their signal, they're sitting there, they're smoking cigarettes, reading their magazines. I mean, they're just waiting for their signal, and he sees this other Orthodox person who's just standing there like a deer, just staring at, can't even move there. And my dad sees this giant piece of plywood that you see at a Home Depot. It's like 6 by 9 piece of plywood, and he kind of hits the other guy and says, "Come on, just pick up that wood. Let's go." And he and the other guy picked up the wood, and they marched right towards where the Germans were lining up. And my dad saying in German, "Excuse me, we have to go through. We got work detail." And he said all the Germans got out of their way, let my dad and the other Jewish guy carry this piece of plywood, through them, and then on the other side of the street where it was kind of safety, and then later on, so he was able to escape that way. And he talked about that this being part of the resistance kind of gave him that extra edge there to, okay, how am I going to get out of the situation, rather than being that deer in the headlights. It's over. I'm doomed. But that was part of the resistance, and my grandfather suspected that he was part of the resistance, and my grandfather was not happy about that. And my grandfather did not want my dad to be part of the resistance. He didn't talk to him directly, but did indirectly. My dad had a little girlfriend at that time, and my dad said that my grandfather talked to the girlfriend and said, "Can you talk to Gabriel to talk him out of joining the resistance?" Because he didn't want him. Again, my grandfather, part of the leadership, and he didn't want to risk anything. And because if you got caught, what happens if you get caught? The whole family gets killed, everyone in the building gets killed, everyone in my dad's work detail gets killed. There's a long list of people that will get killed, and my grandfather did not feel that was a risk worth taking. I asked my dad afterwards, did you ever talk to your dad about that? And he said, no, that was not a topic of discussion, between my dad and I, about the being part of the resistance. But they did do some activities, and they would go out there and they'll blow up some of the trains, which usually every time that happened, the white poles always took credit for everything for that. Like the other 5 different groups would take credit for that, but they would blow up stuff. And then, so in April 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising happened. Again, the idea for the revolt came from Vilnius. Dad very liked everyone to know that. But that then affected Lithuania, because now the Germans knew that all the ghettos had some resistance activities, and they didn't want that to happen. When they went into a town to liquidate the ghetto, they didn't want any they didn't want any trouble in other places. And they knew that there was a link between Vilna and Warsaw, so the Germans actually went to the Jewish Council and said, "We know there's resistance. We got some insider thing that this guy Wittenberg's the head of it. We want him. Hand him over to us," because he was a communist too. So they didn't like him because one, he's a communist, and 2, he was a Jew. And there's a big kind of stick there. And he got kidnapped. He got taken by the Germans, and resistance actually broke him out. And then the resistance actually let him go back because, again, the threat came there that if you don't give it to him, we're going to take a lot of people as consequence for that. And then Wittenberg said, "That's fine, I'll go." And he went and he surrendered himself back to Germans, but he took a cyanide pill with him, and so he committed suicide rather than giving up any information about the resistance there. It's a big debate, but then Abba Kovner became kind of that commander then of the FPO. Again, he's 23 years old. He's the head of the Jewish resistance there. They knew, so with that, the not having the support of the leadership, the Jewish resistance knew that they were not going to be able to do what happened in Warsaw, right? They don't have that kind of leadership there, and that they knew that they're going to have to do something else, because also what happened was that the leadership, like Gens, came to the council and said, look, the liquidation is going to come. When that happens, if everything goes smoothly, the Germans need about 3,000 to 5,000 Jews for some labor camps. If you guys resist, everyone gets killed, but if you guys let us go smoothly, then we'll take 3,000 to 5,000 people will go to labor camps. So what do you want? Everyone to die, or some people to go to labor camps? And that was kind of the dilemma that they had to place. And so as a result of that, the Jewish resistance decided that they were not going to do the resistance when the liquidation date came. Instead, they were going to go out into the forest and fight. So they came, and the city was supposed to be called Juden Free. The only thing was that there was two labor camps, Kalas, and then the other one, the Hakape, which Anne alluded to. That was in Vilna, which my uncle and aunt were there for a little bit of time. They were there for about a month. It was kind of like a low-key place, so they were able to actually escape from that. We'll talk about it later. But I had some family members who were there, but they were not there at the time detailing what the book was going to talk about. But although there were other family members that were there at that time.
So I said to Abba...
one thing. So when the liquidation time came, my dad, not knowing about all the politics and everything going on, he came to his spot. So he came in his work clothes. He came to the spot where he was supposed to man his gun and then put that fight to the death. And then when he got there, instead, what he saw that they were dismantling their weapons and putting it in bags because they were going through the sewer system to go out to the forest, to go through the sewer system with the weapons and then fight in the forest. And he didn't know anything about this. So he's just talking about what happened when he got there at the scene, at the place where he was supposed to meet for his defense.
So I said to Abba, we established a wonderful rapport and very friendly, because he was a student of painting. I was. We discussed art. With him, we usually discussed art. But I said, Abba, I have my forgery tools at home, so it's very important, bring them right away. And I went over, and this is the last time I saw my mother. And I said that I'm a member of underground. And she said she suspected it. And I say I'm going out. It's interesting. I felt very guilty about leaving her. And I still feel very guilty now. And she said, she was 49. This is the right thing for a parent to survive the child. The other way, it's tragic. So I give you a philosophy which I get in life. If you have children, they can die, you can lose them, you have a lot of money, you can lose it. But nobody can take away a life lived well. And I wish I would listen to her. It's very difficult. But she gave me that encouragement, and I went to join the group. Many people were in exactly the same situations.
My dad said almost everyone in the group did not have children. So they're all younger people, because again, if you had children, you're going to think differently, like my grandfather did. And all the people then were young, single people, without children. So they go through the sewer system, and they end up on the other side, and they join the Soviet partisans. So in that area there, You had the white Poles, which were fighting to recreate a democratic Polish country against the Germans, and then you had the Reds, and so the Reds were the only ones that took the Jews in. And my dad remember going there, and he remembered that the first thing the commander said to him was like, "Okay, you guys have been collaborating. All Jews were collaborators, because you were in the ghetto. That means you're a collaborator with the Germans. So all you guys have been collaborating for the last 2 years. Now is your chance to fight the Germans. There's plenty of weapons. They're just in the hands of the Germans. You got to get the guns from them." And so the network was already established there. Now the only thing is that the Russians, all their partisan groups were based on nationalities. You had the Belarusians, you had the Belarusians, Ukrainians, Polish, whatever. Well, Jews are not a nationality, and therefore all the Jews, the 300-400 of them, they wanted to form their own fighting group, but they were not allowed to because they're not a nationality, and they got split up among all the different groups there, with the exception that Abba was allowed to be a captain of one of the groups. So Abba had a captain, led one of the groups. The other groups, they were all dispersed out there. They couldn't stay as one group. The head of my dad's group was a guy, Jurgis, who my dad said looked like Stalin. He dressed like Stalin, looked like Stalin, and everything. And again, he was the head there, and he's someone you didn't really trust all that much. My dad mainly worked at the headquarters because he was the forger, and they didn't have other one to do his duties there. So my dad was mainly at the headquarters, and he would go out on missions. If he did go out on missions, his job was to carry the machine gun for the machine gunner. And the idea is that when you go to fight, the machine gunner took a lot of energy to fire the machine gun. You had to be well rested for that. And therefore, my dad would carry the machine gun for the machine gunner so he can be well rested. And then when he was firing, then my dad would feed the ammunition to the machine gun on these raids. And the raids were dangerous because they didn't have a doctor at that time. So if someone got shot, they ended up having to put to sleep a lot of their wounded from their attacks because it was too risky to bring them back to their headquarters. They couldn't risk getting slowed down and getting caught by the Germans. So that, unfortunately, that was one of the leaders of the group's things had to do as part of your job duties, where if someone got too sick to wounded, you put them, mercilessly ended their lives there, so they would not be captured there. But my dad also, it was because he was a forger, he also had to go into the city, which was dangerous for him, because Vilna was technically Juden-free. And my dad had to go in there. One time he had to go in because the forger they had in town was smudging his documents. And my dad had to go in there and help the guy to figure out how to, do it so his papers would not get smudged. He remembered, though, that the guy Jurgis was not very nice. Even though he liked him, not nice to him, said, "You have to go in town." He goes, "Well, I need a gun and a weapon." He goes, "Well, no, you don't get one." And my dad had to get a weapon from someone else. So he went into town and he had a pistol that he borrowed from another Jewish guy. He had his cyanide pill in case he got captured, and he also had a hand grenade too in case he got stopped. He was supposed to then pull a trigger and blow him and someone else up if he got captured. But it was dangerous for him to go into the city. This is another person who helped him. I said they used the women a lot because the women were easier to hide that they were Jewish than the men, who a lot of times they would tell them to drop their pants and see if they were circumcised or not. It's harder with women with that, and she, unfortunately, she did not survive the war. So now the front is changing, and now the Germans are starting to retreat. They're starting to lose. The next video is my dad talking about one of the missions that he was out with the group and what occurred.
Usually all our actions were done at night, and we never walked on open roads. But this time, the Russian troops were quite close, and in the bright day, we were supposed to attack a German garrison. We are marching. It was summer, and the rye was quite high, and all of a sudden, shooting started. And we knew this were not Germans, we knew this is Polish partisans. And we took cover in the rye. And when we were lying there, I was called that there would be talks. Gabriel, I think, spoke Polish, but the idea was to put a shell. Since in those days I had excellent speaking capability of Polish, Russian, German, and Lithuanian. all of them without an accent, not like my English. And I looked quite preppy. I was called to be a translator. And we came over, and there was a Polish officer in full uniform. They embraced each other, the Polish officer, and said, "Brother Slav, now we have a common enemy, the Germans. And we have no differences with you. We should unite, we should fight together. The only thing that we can go along is the Jews who are in your groups. And you can have your hands clean, you don't have to do anything. Just give an order for Jews to stay in their eye, and we will take care of them." And I was very surprised. This was the condition under which they would let us through. I was very surprised that Gabriel said absolute no. Turned around, we had a little skirmish with them. They ran away, and we went through. I was very amazed. On the other hand, they were the only people who took us. They were our only allies. As you probably know, we tried to make contact with Polish socialist group, with any group. Nobody wanted to accept us. Only the Partisans who were under Russian orders took us.
My dad always had a little different perspective because he was at the headquarters. So earlier, my dad talked about singing, fighting, and singing songs and stuff like that. That comes from being in the headquarters. So my dad was in the headquarters, and so when they weren't fighting, they were drinking. And when they're drinking, they would sing these songs. And there were lots of different ethnic groups coming through there. There were Yugoslavs, Croatians, whatever, and they'd all sing. You like a sing-off. I forget what's that movie with all the singing and everything. The singing contest, Glee or whatever it is. What?
The Voice.
Yeah, The Voice or something like that. So basically, they would have a competition. They sing their patriotic songs. All kind of share. And my dad would listen to them all those songs. And the Jews had their own songs of him and the Partisans, and all the other countries had that. And my dad, he was a linguist. He was up to like 11 languages, and he would learn all these songs and everything like that. And that's what he would be doing. He'd be drinking vodka, getting drunk, and singing songs with them. And that's what he was kind of alluding to earlier. What's your choices? The gas chambers are doing that. And my dad still, if you met my dad when he was alive, and my dad, anyone from a different part of, anyone from Europe who met my dad, whatever part of Europe, my dad knew some patriotic World War II song, and he would sing it to them whether they wanted to hear it or not. He would sing it to them and everything. I remember once we had some movers come, and they were Serbian, and they were moving something, and they saw all the stuff in the house and everything, and my dad, "Oh yeah, Serbian," and he sang them like, the Serbian Communist National Anthem and this other stuff. And I remember the movers were like, we know this, but we were forced to sing these songs. Well, why is your dad like happy about singing them? But that's just the way he was, and he always would just like sing. But he knew like French ones, he knew English ones. Somehow he just had this repertoire. He's like Henny Youngman. He just had this repertoire of like hundreds of these songs from all over, and he was singing them with them, and that again developed a bond with these comrades. Because again, what they were doing, they were the ones that were helping. So then the liberation came, and again, to be bold. Vilna was the first capital city of a German-occupied country that was liberated. So again, always the first to that. And my dad participated in the street-to-street combat in terms of taking the city. So at that point he said he was behind a military, like a tank or something, when he entered the city, and he took part in that street combat in order to retake the city there. And he said it was very euphoric kind of feeling there, because it was just what you're preparing for, retaking the city. Although it was sad because there was only a few thousand Jews left there in Vilna. The next video is my dad talking about, again, another one of these life's dilemmas, and I'll give you a little background so you kind of make sure you understand the thing. So they were fighting, and my dad was called at the headquarters, and the headquarters was like, again, a building. Could have been this building here, just a random building, and it was sort of the headquarters. And the commander said to my dad, "You speak German, right?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "All right. Well, we have a German SS officer, and we have to hold him until the next day to take him to processing, because there's a processing center for all the Germans that were getting captured. You just have to guard him overnight, and we'll take him to processing the next day. And guarding meant in a room like this, there's no door, no lock or anything like that. You have your gun. If he tries to leave, just go ahead and shoot him. And that's sort of kind of the setup for the kind of synopsis of sort of what happened the next day, and when he got his different order from his commander.
I was attached to headquarters, and some woman brought a teenager. He actually was a volunteer from SS, but he was taken prisoner, and since there was nobody else available, and since I spoke German very well, I sat with him, and I spent a whole night talking to him. You don't have any hesitance to shoot an enemy, to act in self-defense and act by shooting an enemy. But the moment you know a person, you come close to him. We sat all night, and all night we discussed topics which were very close to us, both teenagers, both who didn't live yet, thinking about the future, what will happen after the war. And from time to time he got frightened. He says, "But you people are going to shoot me." I said, "Absolutely not." He says, "But you're going to shoot me." I said, "Absolutely not. There is a Geneva Convention, and this is over. If you're guilty, you'll be punished. If you're not, you'll get out." And when I got this order to shoot him, something came into me. First of all, I think I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't do that. So I said, "No, I'm not doing it. If somebody has to shoot him, somebody who doesn't know him. But I'm not going to do that. I promise him that it's not be done." I was disarmed and put in a chicken coop, locked. A few minutes later, they told me that I and those gang, probably because we are two Jews probably two only Jews in that group, that we have to bury him. We shoveled a grave, and I don't know why there was a fence. We found a nail, made a cross and put it over his grave. And the both of us looked at each other. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we somehow felt that as young people we were rebelling against the tactics the Germans used, that after all, we're fighting for the new world. And I'm glad that I didn't do it.
The kid was from Luxembourg, so he was a German from Luxembourg, and as the Germans would come in and occupy the countries, they would go through the telephone book, and anyone who was German they would recruit into the military. And he was actually an art student, so my dad talked to him a lot. And then in the morning, his commander said, "We don't have time. We don't have time to go take him over processing. Just take him in the back. It's pretty easy. You just take him in the back, you make him dig a grave, then you shoot him in the back of the head, and then you bury him." And my dad said no to that, and he got threatened because this is the Soviet army. The penalty for refusing an order is death by firing squad, and which my dad got threatened with. My dad said, "I'm not doing that." He says it for a number of reasons, which he explained. Part of it is the rebellion, and part of it is also we know how horrible happened to the Jews, but also if you were a Russian prisoner of war, it was equally pretty horrible, because most of the Russian POWs died during the war, got killed during the war, starved to death, they used them as slave labor, and the Russians were getting the revenge back against the Germans. And my dad talked about one time during the street combat, they're fighting, and then they're fighting this Germans, and all of a sudden the white flag came up, and the Germans put the white flag out, and the Russians stopped their firing, and they let the Germans come out, and they all kind of came out with their hands up, and they put their guns down. And then he remembers one of the guys saying, "Hey, you guys speak Russian?" He goes, "Come and speak." "Oh, Russian." They did. He said, "Okay, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Here, you want some cigarettes? We can eat some food. We'll give you some cigarettes, food. Don't worry about it." And once they kind of, inspected the area, made sure that there was nothing else, they got all the Germans and everything, they got all the weapons. The Russians lined up the Germans against the wall, and they executed all of them, because the Russians were not taking any prisoner of war from the Germans. And that reflected on him, because he's like, that's just not right, this imminent, discriminate, killing. No one gets, the average person does not decide who gets to live and die. And that was, again, part of his rebellion. And my dad, after he did the video of Partisan Vilna, would kind of show this at different venues. And usually there was always some schmuck who would call my dad out and say what a disgrace he is. He does not deserve to be here talking about his experience during the war because you should have shot that person. I would have shot that person, without any hesitance, would have shot that person. And you just disgraced. You're a coward. You shouldn't be here. And my dad always get really mad at this person, but he didn't say it to that person there. But he would always get mad after that. That does not understand, what it's like to be in those shoes and why I was protesting. And not wanting to execute that person. But this is my dad's picture there, and it gets shown in a lot of journals when they show pictures of different partisans. And my dad always gets mad because there's a series of pictures, and the person said, hold your weapon like you're holding it in battle. And so my dad, put the gun to his face, and so his face is kind of covered up there, and he, a couple of people's faces, but everyone else's faces looks really good. And my dad was upset that one is the one that this person picks and is in the most of the books and stuff like that. I remember when I was in the Museum of the Tolerance in Los Angeles, this picture was up, at some exhibit there. And I told my dad that, and he's like, "It's the one with my face covered." I'm like, "Yes." And he's like, So he was always upset with that. In terms of the rest of the family, so my grandmother went. She didn't want to leave her mother, so she and her mother perished, and probably over at the Medamic camp. If they didn't go to Ponari, then again they had the trains there, and they went to Medamic concentration camp. But my great grandmother, she put money away and to hide several of the family members on this farm there. And my grandfather, I told you that he was going to go down with his ship. Well, this so happens coincidentally the night before the liquidation, he got called that someone needed some help at one of the work camp, and he went over there to help that person. And then it was too late. Curfew was down. It was too late for him to go back to the camp, to the ghetto, and then the liquidation happened. So he then made it his way to the farm. The family always thinks that it was a setup, that someone did that, because it just seems too coincidental that the night before the liquidation he got called out, knowing that he would not do any resources to help himself. At that, though, was my uncle went there with his wife. They also made it there to the farm. They went to Hakapay for about a month or so, and it was very loose there in terms of the guards and stuff. So when I asked them how they left, they said, "We just left." I mean, that's the details I got out of them when they were alive. That they just left, and they went to the farm there, and there were some other people who were at the farm, some other family members. So even though great-grandma passed away, her money helped saved about 7 to 10 members of the family. The family then said that they were Polish, and with the relocations, they wanted to go to Poland. So they wanted to get out of Lithuania, and they wanted to go to Poland. So they said they were Polish, and they ended up in Lublin. And then in Lublin is where Abba Kovner showed up with the rest of his groups, and he formed a new group called the Briha, which was to smuggle Jews out of Eastern Europe into Italy to go into Palestine. So my dad, being in Lublin, he joined that group, the Briha, and he ended up going to Bucharest, in Romania. He was there for about 6 months till about February of 1945, and he was doing the Underground Railroad. He was doing redoing the people's passports as they came through Romania, doing a lot of stuff. They were saying they were Greek because they say they were Greek and they're going back to Greece and stuff. So doing different stuff. Is a large number of people ended up getting out that way. But in terms of his job, though, his official job, and my dad always called it, and no one in the family knows what his official job was, but he always said he worked for the Ministry of Propaganda. And one of the things that he did with the ministry, because he was, again, doing artwork for them, is that he got called to be a court artist at the Medamic concentration camp trial. So before they had Nuremberg, Medamic was the first actually trial of Germans for doing the Holocaust there. And my dad got there, and this is just some of the drawings that he did of the people who ended up being executed there. These drawings, though, no one in the family knew they existed until one day when a lady came to my mom said that a lady came to the house and to my dad said, I wanted to thank you, for donating these pictures to the museum, because he donated them to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in D.C. And my mom's like, what pictures? And my dad's like, well, I was a court artist during the war. And my mom's like, where? What? And my mom's like, and dad's like, I'm not talking about it. So he never talked about it. I remember him taking the pictures out once. He had some photocopies of it. I remember it was, she was from England. It was an English lady in our house, and somehow she talked about the war and everything. And I don't know why, but he took the pictures out and he showed it to her. And no one else in the family, though, can ever remember my dad ever talking about it or seeing the pictures. I just have that one memory, and everyone else in the family is like, we don't really remember that. But I remember him showing this English lady the drawings of that, and he explained that he was there. And it's the only time I ever remember him saying that his mother died at Medamik, because I never knew where his mom died, but I remember him telling her that. But again, no one else in the family has that. I just happened to be there at the right spot, at the right time, which is a lot of how I learned stuff growing up, being at the right spot, the right time, and actually remembering it. But while he was at this trial, though, so earlier he talked about the idealist, and yes, my dad was a member of the Liberal Party in New York City, but he talked about being an idealist and he wouldn't shoot the German. But when he was at this thing, that guilt of leaving his mother kind of returned, and this is from his tape. He never told me this. This is from his tape from when I was reading Charlie Showa tape, unfortunately, after he passed away, that he'd overcome with the guilt about leaving his mother behind, and because he could just only imagine when they were talking about how the whole process worked and everything, that he just imagined his mother and his grandmother there and being naked, in the fields for days until they had, space in the ovens for them. And this kind of got him in a vulnerable moment. Because Abba Kovner, in addition to having the Briha, had another group that he told my dad he had to join. And he told my dad, you survive not because you're lucky or smarter, but just because, you survive not because you're better or smarter, but just because you're lucky. You cannot selfishly live this life. You have to give your life to a cause. The cause that my dad wanted, Abba wanted my dad to join was the Avengers. Now, there was a lot of retaliation by Jews against the Germans. A lot of stuff you don't hear about, some stuff you do hear about it, but there were a lot of retaliations going on, and the Avengers were one of those groups that were doing that. But Abba took it a couple of steps further than that, and Abba feeling was, if that 6 million Jews died, then 6 million Germans died, because never again shall Jewish blood be shed without equal retaliation. And they had a plan. Abba had a plan. And they were going to poison all the water supply of German cities, and to kill. And they had to figure out how to get it so that it would hit the German side and not hit, like American base and stuff. They were going to poison German prisoner of war camps, and so they can get 6 million get their revenge there. And they had a small cell about it. I think the next. Abba went to Israel. Right, at that time, 45. Again, it's a big controversy because he claims in his memoir that a lot of the top people, like Chaim Weissman and other people, actually gave him the Zyklon B, the same gas that they killed in the gas chambers, gave him that for his plan to poison the water wells. And a lot of the top, leaders founding of the state of Israel there, a lot of them are denying that. No, it wasn't us that did that. So there's a big controversy who actually gave him the poison and stuff. But Abba was coming back from Egypt with the poison in order to poison the water wells. And they had their Asians get jobs in the German cities and water wells and stuff and German military bases. They're just waiting for the poison. Well, other Jewish groups tipped off the British that Abba was doing this because they didn't want the bad publicity from this happening. And Abba actually had to throw that stuff overboard, and he got arrested, and he sent a telegram, Plan B. Right? So Plan A was to do kill in the waters. Plan B was the prisoner of war camps, and the group then had to they carried out one of their plan against one POW camp, and since they didn't have the Zyklon B, they had to use arsenic, and arsenic didn't work too well. They had jobs as bakers at that camp, and they put all the arsenic in the bread, and they gave the bread to the prisoners, and several hundred of them got sick, and it's varying numbers of how many passed away from that. But that's the act that they were able to accomplish, because after that they kind of abandoned that idea. My dad did not take part of it, and My dad said that he always quit after that. He always told me as a kid that I joined, but then after I got my senses, I quit, and I wasn't part of that group. However, on a show tape, another tape when they interview him about his participation in that, he says he was on call for them. And he said that like a little smile. Yes, I was on call for them, but they didn't need me. So a little, not really sure, what the truth is there, but he did not take part in any of that. And actually, later on, when after that film, that story kind of came up, the ones that did take part of that, the Germans tried to prosecute them and extradite them back to Germany for crimes of killing the German POWs, but that did not happen. My dad ended up in Rome. So now we're going after the war. He ended up in February in Rome. He joined his family. His family had gone there already through that underground network, through the Briha, and they were all in there. And they were taking advantage of part of the war reparations was that Italy offered free education to displaced refugees. So my dad first started in art school, and this is here, the Royal Academy of, actually, he always said still was the king there. It was the Royal Academy of Fine Arts. But then they got rid of the king and became the Academy of Fine Arts in Rome in 1945. And my dad, unlike me, because I'm the rebellion person, he always wanted to dress up and really nice, and that's why you can see him, how well he's dressed. And the other people are still wearing like military uniforms, clothing that they had. But my dad always, and he learned that from his father. He said that his father got a job in Italy, and he got a job as a doctor. He got to be a doctor in Italy, and he had a hospital and privileges. And his medical license was that he can practice medicine on non-Italians. So he got to be the doctor for all the Jewish refugees, and they paid him whatever they can pay him. And he always remember his father would always, whenever he got a call to go to the hospital, would always shave first and put on a tie before going to the hospital. And he always asked that, aren't you rushing to the hospital? No, I have time to shave and put on a tie. So my dad kind of gets that a little bit from that. But then he switched to architecture because he got pressured by the mainly that you're not going to America is not going to give visas to artists. They want professionals, and so he got pressured to go to switch to architecture. My uncle and aunt were at medical school at that time, and so they finished up medical school. Oh, actually, sorry. When independence came, my dad went and volunteered to go fight, but the recruiter said everyone who's in school stays in school. Everyone not in school can go fight. Once we win the war, we need professionals to rebuild the city. So my dad stayed on and continued on to in his studies there. But he did try to volunteer for that. But he went to Italy. He was in Italy. The family, even though my grandfather had money, but they had a job. He was living on the sofa, and his brother's mother-in-law was on the other sofa, and he didn't like it. One day he got home, and like all these architectural drawings, they put like the dinner on top of his drawings on the table because there wasn't two tables there. So he went to Polytech Torino, where a student house. Someone came and got funding from the Americans, and it was a student house. It was all a dorm of all displaced refugees, and some of my dad's best friends are from there, and they're all displaced refugees, and in Torino that he went to. And his goal was he was Zionist. He wanted to go to Israel. However, my family did not want to go to Israel. In 1949, they got papers to immigrate to the U.S., and they wanted. So my grandfather, uncle, and aunt, they wanted to come to America. My dad didn't want to, and he was outvoted, and he reluctantly came to America. But he didn't want to leave the family. So his choice was stay in Italy and then eventually go to Israel or go with the family. And he said, "Okay, I'll come to America with the family." And so they came in November 1921, right before Thanksgiving, which is why Thanksgiving was always the big holiday in my family, because they would always talk about how thankful they were for coming to America, and just kind of coincided with the at that same time coming here. They had to work on the boat. My dad said he threw up the whole time. He wasn't in the kitchen peeling potatoes, but grandfather got to stay in a low, in a stateroom and everything, but everyone else had to work on it. My dad got into graduate school. He was he was in Harvard. He got a scholarship to Harvard. He was nervous though because the program was 2 years. He was nervous that something might happen to the scholarship, so he did the program in a year and a half after learning English quickly. His roommate in the second year was Zbigniew Brzezinski. Was his roommate second year. He said because they're both Polish, but my dad said he and him did not get along. My dad was he said it was him. He just was very anti-Polish, and even though Zbigniew is Polish, so therefore he was just on the wrong country there. And he said he was just not friendly to him. So they did not stay in touch afterwards. A lot of his professors, those who, in architecture, a lot of professors were German, and my dad took notes in German because a lot of the professors were German, and we talked to them in German. And the first time he wrote English was doing a test in graduate school. He met my mom in 1962. My mom is a survivor from Poland. Her father's name was Epstein, but then her stepdad was Brzezinska. They met because one of the people on the farm was my dad's cousins, Ami, whose family ended up in Poland after the war and went to university with my mom. They both went to journalism school in Warsaw. She ended up immigrating to Israel and then coming to New York. My mom immigrated to Canada. My mom didn't want to leave Poland. She actually had a good time in Poland, but her mom told her she had to immigrate to find a Jewish husband, so she had to leave. So she went to Canada. And then she came to New York to visit my dad's cousin, and that's how my dad met. And they had a Montreal, New York romance going on for a couple of years before they ended up getting married. She's 13 and a half years younger than my dad. So that's on their honeymoon. This is the picture that my dad kept on his desk at work with my sister and I, because my dad was a skier. And that's the picture of my sister and I when we were kids. And again, he did not talk much about his experience until that when I was in college, that they did a documentary, The Partisans of Vilna, and they interviewed him, and then they would show that at different venues, and my dad would go as a speaker, and that kind of got him out of his shell a little bit to talk a little bit more about some of the experiences during the war. And that's why I learned a little bit more about different things from him. We went to Lithuania once. That was in 1996. Went with me. My sister didn't want to go, so it was my mom, dad, and I. We went to there. It was a very emotional time for my dad. I wish I took better notes. I wish I took better pictures. I wish the computer was around a little bit more when I went there. But I got to meet. He still has some of his friends from childhood who were there. And we didn't have any relatives there because our cousins from there had immigrated already. We had some relatives that were sent to Siberia during the war, and they came back to Vilna and they immigrated to Israel. So we did not have any family there. But we went there, and then we went to Warsaw afterwards, which was my mom's first time since 66 to Warsaw. Again, we had no family in Warsaw, in Poland. This is just a picture after with Abba. I used to see Abba a lot. They used to interact with each other. So we used to see them in Israel, and we used to see them here. That's Vitka, his wife, and that's Abba later on. This is a picture from a coffee book that Mark Segler took. He's one of the Rolling Stone photographers. He's from Texas, and he did a book. He took pictures of survivors, and they had like a 2-page kind of excerpt about their story there. My dad at first didn't like the picture because it cut off. The picture actually is his head kind of cut off there, and he didn't like that at first. But apparently, once he understood that was like new and avant-garde, then he kind of liked it. But it kind of captures him because my dad was, despite everything, he was like a kidder. He would be the person here, telling you dirty jokes, dirty Yiddish jokes, old Henny Youngman jokes and stuff like that, singing those old Partisan songs from every country, whatever. And he was a big kidder. And then you hear my mom would be in the background saying, "Quiet! No one wants to hear you sing. No one wants to hear your jokes or anything like that." But he was known that as a kidder and a talker. And his most fun thing he used to do was go skiing. So sometimes he'd let me play hooky from school, and he was part of a ski club in New York, and he'd go every Wednesday up to the Catskill Mountains to go skiing, and he would go in this group, and then he'd always go there, and all the other people were all other, like mainly Europeans, and they all have their wine and their cheese, and then again on the way back, they're all singing songs and drinking wine and cheese and singing Italian songs and Polish songs and Russian songs and all this other kind of stuff like that. And again, a lot of my memories are of him on that bus going up there and them drinking on the way back and stuff. But this is one of the quotes that from that book when they came to take my father, from Voices of the Holocaust, that I think people are neither basically good nor bad. There are very few people that are very good or very bad. Behavior, most people in difficult, stressful times, why people did what they did or didn't do what they did. And again, so much is about leadership. I thank you for your time, and I'm more than welcome to any questions you guys have about my father, and hopefully at some point we'll get my mom's PowerPoint up there too, talk about her part, her survival.
Could you tell us about how you got hold of all those wonderful pictures and documents? Because it's really incredible that you've got this.
So the pictures are because the housekeeper kept the pictures and gave it to my uncle. So my uncle, since he's the older brother, has all that stuff. He has all the photographs and everything like that. They were kind of saved from it. The videos are two-part. One is from the interview for Partisans of Vilna, where that's for the younger one, where he's in kind of the black hair. And later on, when he's in white hair, that's from his Shoah tape. And we got the videos from that, which again, sad I did not watch the Shoah tape because unfortunately, about a year after he did that, he had a stroke. And I remember I was in medical school at the time. I remember him giving me the tape. Like, do you want to watch it? I remember I was post-call. I was falling asleep. And I'm like, okay, let me get to it. But I was so tired. And then it wasn't until like after he passed away that I did watch it, which is, again, I regret because, again, it would open up so many more questions from him. So that's where we got the videotapes were from.
So the housekeeper was
Polish.
And was really nice to you guys.
She was very nice, and like I said, she saved that stuff, and she I didn't keep any of them. All the other people, families kept the money, but they were lucky that she kept the money, and when they needed it, they would call her, and she would doll it out and everything. So they were very lucky in that situation with the housekeeper. So.
And I think we're also very lucky that you remember all the stories.
Yeah. I remember. Like I said, it's a lot, and it's amazing. And everyone, talking about, because everyone has different recollections of stuff for that. So luckily, I have to. One cousin will remember something, and other cousins will remember something, and it was great. A lot of other photographs for Anne got a lot of photographs. She knows how to get from all the museum archives and stuff like that. For some stuff, like she was the one that got the manifest from when they came to America on the boat log and everything. I tried going on that in genealogy. It was a little hard for me. Yes?
I'm Karen. How old were you when your father died?
My dad passed away in 2003, so I would have been 37 when he passed away. So my dad was 13 and a half years older than my mom, and so when he was 74, he had a stroke, and then he was 79 when he passed away. So he lived like 5 more years after his stroke.
Was his stroke?
The problem with his stroke, it affected his ability to like eat and drink. So like he couldn't eat. He only had to eat, he couldn't drink, so he had like a tube for the drinking, and affected a lot of his balance. So he had a little trouble with his balance, and then it affected also his initiation. So a lot of times he had a hard time. He could understand everything, but he had a hard time initiating things. So sometimes he'd be there, he had his fork in the food, and he'd be like, "You're gonna take a bite?" Yes. And that action to bring the food into his mouth, there was a delay with that. And it was amazing. Like he'll surprise you sometimes. Like sometimes he'd be totally with it and explain it, and other times he would not. But when I was growing up, though, in terms of hearing stuff, so my mom has a different perspective than my dad. My mom was younger; she was 2 when the war started. She does not like hearing any of those stories. She just does not like that, and she didn't want to talk about anything. The only reason I have the tape is that for my son's bar mitzvah project, he asked her, "Can I tape your testimony and then make a presentation like this?" And she said yes, because it's the grandson, so she has to say yes. But she did, she wouldn't do it for anyone else. But when I was again growing up, my father had mental problems, so he had several hospitalizations for depression, and my mom was always like the thing of like very protective of him. Don't ask him questions. Don't get him sad. Don't get him upset. Don't talk about this type of stuff and everything. I mean, I even remember like when we were there, we went to Ponari. We were at Ponari, and my dad's getting very emotional about this stuff, and my mom picks a fight with my dad, and she did. She picked a fight with him, and she's like, "Why are you taking so long?" My dad's like, "I'd like to pay respects to my family." She's like, "Well, you haven't done that already? Come on, you're taking way too long." And they started like arguing there, at Ponari, because my mom did not want to be there, but she had to be there, for my dad, but it was too emotional for her. And then, like I said, they just started arguing, there over at Ponari, which is not, I mean, that's just the way. So a lot of times, like I said, she did not like my dad when my dad would talk about stuff. So she kind of quieted him down a little bit in terms of talking about things. And again, because of his depression and stuff like that, he also kind of avoided some stuff until the Partisans came out.
Was this project, is this a recent project that
Yeah.
you've been doing?
Yeah. My son is 16, so we did. So my son was supposed to do that for his bar mitzvah project when he turned 13. So I had to have this done before him. So therefore, I can say to him, "Look, I did it. Now you have to do it." So Anne helped me, kind of beat him to his project. So we did it. So we did that in 2000. That would have been in 2016 is when we did the PowerPoint presentation, and she helped me a lot again to find stuff and how to do stuff, and I kind of fine tune it a little bit depending on what kind of the audience is and everything. So this is you got the longer version. So I'm sorry about that.
Well, it's a fantastic presentation and a
Yes.
really great story.
Thank you.
And your dad seems just a really outstanding personality. Watching.
He was, like I said, he was a kidder and a jokester. A lot of my family is that way, and I think it helped him. Again, people cope with different ways and stuff. I think the humor always helps a lot in terms of perspective and stuff. But other questions about stuff?
Very much, and go have some food or some wine or something.
We are, well,
Listen, you were moving into
it's good. It's a great book. All those things.